Okay. Good morning, everyone. Again, we are in Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, in the dream that Daniel was seeing. If you remember, the dream is a dream in which Gavriel takes center stage, and this has been a dream that deals with history. The problem is we don't know what era is being foretold. And so until now, we've been dealing with a couple of different approaches, whether or not we had a brief mention of the Hasmonean Empire and then moved over directly into Rome. That was the opinion of Rashi, or we were focusing more on the Hashmonaim and still with the Hashmonaim, or something else. Starting with Pasuk Lamed Aleph, just to make it interesting, we start with three different approaches in three different empires. The three different approaches and the three different empires will be the approach of Rashi, who has maintained all along that we're dealing with Rome at this point. He had switched over to Rome about 10 psukim back. We're going to deal with the opinion of the Malbim, which is also the first opinion offered by the Abarbanel, that at this point we are switching over to Rome. But then the Malbim is going to take a different approach, and the Ibn Ezra is going to take a different approach. And then we go to the second opinion of the Abarbanel. The second opinion of the Abarbanel, which also the Dat Mikra reflects, is an opinion that says this is still talking about the Hasmonean dynasty. It's still talking about Antiochus, and it's still talking about that entire era of the Hanukkah story. So we have three different approaches to go with. And if you look in the Pasuk says, Uzroim mimenu ya'modu. And they will, and from them will arise powerful people. Zroa, this is, for instance, says Zroa HaNetuyah, the outstretched arm. So Lamed Aleph. Zroim mimenu ya'modu. They will establish these powerful successors or people to work with them or under them. So Rashi says that this is literally talking about the Romans, and they're going to send their soldiers and their leaders against Jerusalem. The Malbim says this does talk about the Roman era, but it's immediately after Antiochus. It's what's coming up next. It's a little bit earlier in the Roman Empire. And the Abarbanel also says, no, this is still talking about Antiochus. But what happened was, in the midst of the battle with Antiochus, he ran out of funds. And so he sent Lysias to take over the battle, put down the revolt. And he actually went back to Syria, where he was based, to be able to collect enough funds to move the war forward. And they are going to defile the Beit HaMikdash that was fortified. Now, if I'm talking about the Roman era, Rashi, Malbim, why would we call the Beit HaMikdash fortified? Because if you remember, Herod's Beit HaMikdash was built like a fortress. You remember that the turrets at the corners. In fact, there was the Antoninus, which was his great military fortress as well, which was built on Har HaBayit. And so it's called the fortified Beit HaMikdash. In that sense, it makes sense that we're talking about a Roman era already, jumping all the way over to Herod's time. However, at the same time, we could also say the fortified, well, it doesn't mean militarily fortified. It's the source of power. And so according to the opinion that this is still talking about Hasmonean Empire, and during the Hasmonean dynasty, the Beit HaMikdash was not such a fancy building, that's what it's referring to, Veisiru HaTamid. And they're going to stop the Korban Tamid. Now again, and I'm sorry to keep on bouncing back and forth, if this is the Roman times, a year and a half before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was already a time where the Korban Tamid was stopped. If it is talking about the Hasmonean time, well, in the Hasmonean revolt, the first 3 years, 167 to 164, they had stopped the Korban Tamid. Yeah. Oh, okay. V'natnu hashikutz mishomem. What? I am still on line 31. V'natnu hashikutz mishomem, and they placed in its place this disgusting silent thing. A disgusting silent thing is an idol. They brought into the Beit HaMikdash an idol, and that idol was put up there, and the idol was put. And this happened both in the time of the Hanukkah story, where they brought an idol into the Beit HaMikdash, and also following the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, there were idols that were established there. So both parallel storylines can work. Umar shi'ei vrit yachanif b'chalakot. And those who were flattered, were able to be flattered with smooth word, with smooth talking. The Marshiev, these were people who were evil and they had violated the brit, the covenant. Now, who are the violators of the covenant? The Ibn Ezra says, this is talking about the time of Titus, where a lot of people left Judaism and began to support the Romans, and they were flattered, meaning flattered that they were able to smooth talk them and say, come with us, everything will be good, everything will be wonderful. If I go to the Hanukkah time, these are the Hellenizers. Okay, these are the Jews who had been Hellenized. They were Jews who, were promised all sorts of wonderful opportunities. By the way, not that much different than we have at other times in Jewish history, where they're members of the Jewish people who, because they won opportunity. We had that at the time, following the Edict of Tolerance of Franz Joseph at the end of the 18th century, where Jews were able to leave the ghetto. But still, in order to leave the ghetto, there was an element of assimilation, of integration into their communities, which was beyond keeping the Torah. Umar shi'ei vrit yachanif b'chalakot, v'am yodea elokav yachaziku v'asu. But there will be some Jews who are going to hang in there strong, and they're going to be strong, and they're going to continue to observe Judaism. Now we have two parallels again. I'm going back and forth. If this is the Hanukkah story, this is Matityahu and his sons, the Hasmoneans. If this is the Roman era, we're talking about people, for example, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a person who was said, Ten liyavna v'chachameh, who established a new center of Jewish learning. That new center of Jewish learning allowed for the continuation of Torah, even though it was without a Beit HaMikdash. So both possibilities exist. Umaskilei am yavinu l'rabim. At this time, there are going to be people, there are going to be Talmidei Chachamim who are going to be teaching the masses. They're going to try to hold on to the people. Roman, it's the Chachamim, it's Rebbe, it's the time of the Mishnah. The Ibn Ezra says it's the time of the Mishnah. Abarbanel suggests this is the time of Matityahu, who were fighting the Hellenizers. There's going to be this intelligentsia of the Jewish people, the leaders, the Torah leaders of the Jewish people, who are going to be teaching. V'nichshelu b'cherev u'lehavam b'shvi u'vaviza yamim. And they're going to, unfortunately, these people who are leaders are ultimately also going to suffer, and they're going to be killed. Some will be sent off into exile. Some will be killed. It could be that we're talking again, both times in Jewish history, there were leadership that were murdered. If you remember, we talked about this last week, that when it comes to the Hashmonaim and the 5 sons, 4 of them died in the course of the battles. And others were murdered, other leadership were murdered by the Seleucids when it comes to the time of the Beit HaMikdash. We know, the Hadrian Revolt, which was a very brief revolt. That's Bar Kokhba's revolt that took place after the destruction. And we read all the time, twice a year, we read about the Aseret Hargei Malchut. We have the martyrology of the 10 great Talmidei Chachamim. Actually, when you compare Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, you see it's not 10. Both have lists of 10, but they don't agree exactly on the lists, because there were many, many people who were murdered, trying to keep people together, to try to keep them as part of the Jewish people. Uvehi kashlam ya'azru ezer ma'at. And when they were trying to do what they could do, when they were falling on this, they tried to be able to help with small kinds of help. Now, Rashi says that the Jews trying to save themselves were bribing the Romans. They were trying all sorts of ways to stop things. They were bribing the authorities. The Ibn Ezra said that they had just a little bit of help from God. There wasn't a salvation, but there was a little bit of help. The Abarbanel picks up though and says, wait a second, ma'at, that's a great word when we talk about Hanukkah. Rabim biyad ma'atim. That this is talking about while all of these terrible things were happening, there was a small minority who were trying to help them. Not that they had small kinds of help, but there were small people, small numbers of people who were able to help. V'nilvu alehem rabim b'chalak lakot. And a lot of people joined into them with the smooth talk. It was an insincere alliance that was created. If we remember at the time of the Greeks, what happened when the Hanukkah story, and this goes back again, Ibn Ezra, the Abarbanel number 2, the Dat Mikra, what was happening, the Hellenized Jews were first on the side of the Seleucid Greeks. When the battle was turning in favor of the Jews, these Jews who had assimilated began helping out the Maccabees. They kept on looking who's on top, and we'll go with whatever was on top. So that it was an insincere kind of alliance that was created. However, the Metzudas David takes a very different approach. And what they say is who is helping? This is helping the enemy. That actually there's going to be a little bit of help for the Jews, but a lot of people are going to help the enemy in these battles. So it's the exact opposite approach. As opposed to helping the Jews out, it's helping the enemy out. Pasuk Lamed Hey. Umina maskilim, going back to those maskilim that we had talked about in Pasuk Lamed Gimel, the elites, the intelligentsia of the Jewish people, yikashlu litzrof bahem ulevarer v'lilaben ad et ketz. They failed litzrof bahem, to purify them. When you take a metal and you heat it up to remove all of the impurities, that's called tzoref. Okay, that's the process is called tzoref. To tzoref is to purify, to get rid of all of the dross and things. Ulevarer v'lilaben, levarer is to separate out or to whiten. All of these are terms of trying to purify things. Now, interestingly, this is going to happen to them because ultimately there are people who are going to die, who are going to fall, because as the Pasuk continues, it's not the time yet for the Gula. It's not the time yet for redemption. Ad et kates ki od moed. It's still off in the future. So people who are so convinced that we can succeed, we will win, we will find the redemption, will cause the redemption, many of them are going to fall along the process while they're trying to bring out truth versus the untruth. Yeah.
Failing in their religiosity, failing in their physical lives, failing to be adherent. What are we talking about?
Yes. Okay. The reality is that according to Metzudat David, what they're talking about is that because there are going to be some people who are making the calculation and saying, okay, we fight because now is the time for the final redemption. Those people are failing in what they're doing. They're failing both the people and they're failing the sense of faith. And those people are going to fall. So that's an element of faith and they're failing. The failings could also be that when it talks about people's observances, the Dat Mikra takes that approach, that people who were just coming along because they were insincere. Those are the people who are going to fall as well. It's not the time yet for the big salvation, is what he's saying. Yeah.
The interesting word is maskilim, which became a whole different historical meaning like in the 1700s.
Yeah, well, it was adopted, right? The Maskilim became from the Haskalah. Those were the enlightened ones, those who were following the Wissenschaft des Judentum, but not all Maskilim went from, right? That's not a negative. It wasn't pejorative. By the way, Maskilim wasn't pejorative until after the fact. So, when I was in high school, when we were high school time, we had teachers who were Maskilim. Okay, they were maskilim. They were well educated in Tanakh, and they had they knew all of the techniques. For instance, David Tzvi Hoffman was a maskil, but he was a maskil who used the Haskalah, who used this new scientific approach to understanding Torah for the positive, to strengthen faith. Eliezer Berkovitz, who was a Talmud of that whole school where David Tzvi Hoffman was. Okay, he was in that approach. Many others. That was Haskalah. One.
Prime Minister Menachem Begin was in Moscow.
Prime Minister Menachem Begin was a politician. It's the Maskilim Begin. Maskilim. No, Maskilim. The Maskilim was what happened was in the 19th century, in the beginning of the late 18th, 19th century. The Haskalah is really rising with the beginning of the openness of communities. So 1789. I mentioned before the Edict of Tolerance of Franz Joseph, which allowed Jews to be able to go into professions and exit the ghetto and gave them rights and privileges as citizens. With that came a whole series of countries who allowed it. We often identify the beginning of the Haskalah movement at the same time as Moses Mendelssohn. He was a little later in the picture. Moses Mendelssohn was a frum Jew. Okay, Rav Hirsch quotes Mendelssohn's Talmidim. He quotes the Biur in Rav Hirsch's commentary to Chumash. He quotes him, and there's many examples of people. The Chassam Sofer referred to him as Rav Moshe Midessa. Later, what happened with Mendelssohn is that his Talmidim went off. Okay, whether it's Hertz Vizeli, who was Naftali Tzvi Hertz Vizel, who authored, I think it was either 2 or 3 of the commentaries to the Chumash for Mendelssohn's famous Biur, but he also wrote a famous piece called Divrei Shalom Ve'emet, which was advocating for a different form of Jewish education, which would give primacy to what he called Torat Adam over Torat Elokim, the general knowledge primary over others. But again, the Ketav Kabbalah quotes Vizel in his commentary. When you see Reish Nun Vav, Rabbi Naftali Vizel, okay, that's in the Ketav Kabbalah quotes him. Rav Hirsch quotes him, and so that initial era of Maskilim was not negative. It's what happened later, the rise of the Reform movement and these pieces that came along, where they began to, to abandon all of the faith pieces. This is part of, again, it even plays into the disagreement between Rav Shalom Raphael Hirsch and Rav Azriel Hildesheimer, which was Berlin versus Frankfurt. Yeah.
But weren't most people who were involved at Maskilim, they just were totally off the derrick?
Well, so I don't know numbers. I can't give you numbers. I can tell you normally when we talk about Maskilim, it's normally from a religious perspective, a pejorative title. You're a maskil versus someone who's faithful. The reality is there were great rabbis who were also benefits of the Wissenschaft school, but they didn't take it to the point of denying Torah Misinai. Yeah. But to go back to this part, maskilim here is not at all, because remember also when we talk about it in Ezra Nehemiah, V'sum Seichel. Okay, we talk about this term seichel, not in a pejorative. Someone has nowadays, if I say you have a lot of seichel, I'm not calling you an apostate. I'm calling you a person who has a good, intuition and insight. Okay.
Was Maskilim involved Germany?
No, Germany was a major center. Germany was a major center of the Haskalah movement, but the Haskalah movement moved also east from Western Europe, but also moved east to find it in Russia. The Haskalah. Yeah.
Just to go back to the Mouse Mendelssohn thing.
Yeah.
Wasn't it true that he didn't have any children that remained Jewish from whatever you would somebody?
2 generations down already. I don't know if he didn't have any, his grandchildren definitely. Mendelssohn, the composer, was a direct descendant. It was a grandson, and he had been baptized. There's no question he was, and I'm way off the subject, so I apologize. The reason, when I look at the Maskilim, I also always try to remember Rebbe Zriel Hildesheim. I remember the Ketava Kabbalah, Mecklenburg. You remember as well, Reb David Tzvi Hoffman. You start thinking about there were people who were beneficiaries of the scientific approach to Judaism. And even today, if we look at all of the modern the modern manuscripts that are being published, whether it's the Ritva, the Rashba, the Ran, the Gemaras, it's an outgrowth of that approach, of the scientific approach. The Dat Mikra that I'm learning out of, brings in archaeology and all the rest of these things. It's part of that same openness that was created of the use of all of the various disciplines to help us understand Torah. Now, if I use those various disciplines and then I reject core principles of faith, then I go over the death.
The second thing was, look at the play on words, Hamaskilin Yikashlu. It's like a linguistic, like if you just flip the letters in Hebrew.
Right.
And you get, stumbling.
Stumbling, right, from Maskil. I think you're 100% right on a literary perspective on this.
Yeah.
Okay. V'asach hirtzono. And then they did, v'asach hirtzono hamelech, the king did as he wanted. Now, until now, for the last 5 psukim, we've been talking either Rome or Hasmoneans. Just when you think it's safe, now here comes 3 different tracks. Okay, Rashi continues with Rome. He's hanging on to Herod and the post-destruction. The Reed says, and others say this is still talking about Antiochus. We're still in the Hanukkah story. The Abarbanel says, no, we're not going to skip a whole bunch of time. We are now walking into Constantine. This is the beginning of Christianity. We have jumped from the 1st century CE over to the beginning of the 4th century CE, to Constantine and the Holy Roman Empire we're beginning to talk about. And what did this do? He did as he desired, v'yit romem, v'yit gadel, and he raised himself and he was powerful, al kol el, over any other person of power. It doesn't necessarily mean a god, even though some do say God with a lowercase g. But remember, B'nai Elim, when we talk about an El it could also be a powerful person. Ve'al kel Elim, and over God. So this new emperor came up and is over God. That's where Reb Saadia Gaon explains it. And what does he do? Yedaber Niflaot. He's going to start talking about Niflaot. Now, Niflaot are things, Niflaot is a wonder, right? He's going to talk about wonders. So the Abarbanel says, yeah, this is the beginning of Christianity. And they're going to start talking about virgin birth, the resurrection of Yeshu. They're going to talk about all these wonders that had appeared. Walking on water, we can do all of these different things. Interestingly, the Mitzudat David says they're going to be talking, the Niflaot here, he's going to be talking about wondrous things, b'chutzpah ve'azut, with a great sense of chutzpah. Okay, the arrogance is going to be, v'hitzliach al kala v'za'am. He's going to succeed until God's anger will end against the Jewish people, because what was decreed was being done. In other words, right now, the Jews are going to be persecuted, not because Constantine or the Romans or Antiochus are that powerful. It's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decreed that this kind of thing is going to happen. Now, there's a disagreement. Elokei avotav, okay, but regarding the God of his forefathers. So Rashi says this is the God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's the avot. Mitzudot David says, no, this doesn't make sense. What do you mean? Antiochus, no matter who you say, Rome, their forefathers weren't Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Who are we talking about? Avotav. It's talking about the forefathers of the Roman Empire. He's going to go ahead and lo yavin. He's not going to understand it. In other words, he's going to reject the pagan practice and create a new religion, Constantine. According to the Abarbanel, he's going to say, look, he's the Notzri. He is going to be, Notzri comes from both Nazarene, Nazareth, you're right, but Notzri is also the creation. He creates something. He's not going to accept it. Al chemdat nashim ve'al kol Eloka lo yavin. And regarding that, the love of women and all other gods, and then he will not understand. Now Rashi takes the approach, Chemdat Yamim is talking about the Jewish people. Why are the Jewish people called Chemdat Yamim? Because in Shir HaShirim we're referred to as Hayafa Banashim. Okay, and so as a result, we're fine. That's the Jewish people. However, well, first of all, the Dat Mikra says this is the Chemdat Nashim is talking about there were idols that were specific for women, women's favorite idols. He doesn't have any, he's going to reject those idols. But the Abarbanel says, no, what's Chemdat Nashim? The love of women. Constantine's going to come in and they're going to begin to practice celibacy among the priests. Okay, and this is where it's referred to. It's the Nazirut of the priests. And then when it comes, they're going to, Ve'al kol Eloka lo yavin, they won't understand. According to the Abarbanel and according to the Malbim, this is actually a little bit of a good thing. They will reject all other gods. They're going to worship God. Okay, in their way, they're going to worship God. However, the Mitzudat David says, no, they're going to worship God, but they're not going to get it on how to worship God. Lo Yavin. They're going to have the Trinity. And so because of that, it's not worshiping the way you should be worshiping, Velo Yavin. Ki al kol yitgadal, and the reason this is going to happen is because they view themselves bigger and better than anything else. Le'eloka ma'uzim, and regarding, or really we should put in the word but, regarding the God of power, the Dat Mikra says, this is going to be, it should be read Eloha ma'uzim. It's their new God of power, okay, who gives them the power. Now, it could be, this is, if we're talking about Romans still, or we're talking about, according to Dat Mikra, we're still in the Hasmonean time, this could talk about already when we're rising, Zeus and those kinds of gods. Al Kano Yechabed, they're going to honor him in the place he sits. Now, according to Veleloka Ma'uzim, which is the Abarbanel's approach, this is talking about our God, Yud Kei Vav Kei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're going to give a sense of honor to God. Well, the Christian church, and again, we'll see there's a disagreement on this. This is where the real interesting disagreement comes between whether or not the Christian church is considered idolatry because of the Trinity, or is it considered a monotheistic religion? Okay, there's a famous debate among Chazal. A lot of it is colored by where they lived. Those Jews who generally lived in Christian lands would often, especially Rabbeinu Tam, they looked favorably on Christianity, not as a religion, but they said it's a monotheistic religion. It's not Avodah Zarah. Many of the Chachamim who lived in Arab lands viewed Islam as a monotheistic religion, but Christianity as a polytheistic religion. Yeah.
It just seems to me, correct me please if I'm wrong, that we're moving from power struggles and empires into some kind of theological
100%.
war.
100%. We are moving to theology because what's happening now, the battle has shifted, and the Jews have lost on this picture, and the Jews have lost. And so what's happening is, what is the relationship now? What's the Jews' relationship to the victor? What's the victor's relationship to the Jews as a religion? 100%. The interesting thing is, if I still say we're still stuck in the Hasmonean time, it's a temporary, a very short period of time while they lost. And it happened in a couple of different shifts during the Hasmoneans. If I'm talking Rome and Constantine, well, we're still in that mess to this day. So it's a long period of time. ולאלוקם אשר לא ידעו אבותיו יכבד בזהב ובכסף ובאבן יקרה ובחמודות. And what will happen is the God which their forefathers did not know, they're going to honor that God with all sorts of, with silver and gold, with precious stones and other important gifts, meaningful gifts. So all of this, we're really not sure who we're referring to. By the way, Velokasher lo yadu, interesting, the Ibn Ezra says that it's actually talking about Veloha asher lo yadauhu avotav. They're going to add gods. Remember, the Ibn Ezra's Spanish, talking about Christianity. Where does Christianity have other gods? Saints. And so they're going to start worshiping. They worship. It appears to us, at least, that they worship saints. Okay, they have medallions of saints. They have all sorts of things for saints. So we're not sure what it is, but this does fit very nicely into Christianity. And they're going to build fortresses, powerful fortresses for these foreign gods. Now, interestingly, Rashi says they're going to build big buildings for the honor of the foreign gods. Says the Abarbanel, says the Malbim, what are we talking about? Cathedrals. They're building cathedrals, these massive structures that are going to honor this foreign god, and they're doing it. And this Asher Yakir Yarbeh Kavod. And Asher Yakir is going to be those who they recognize, they're going to give great honor to. Now, who is those they recognize? According to Rashi, it's going to be their leadership. They're going to give a lot of gifts to them, and the king will decide who's going to get who's going to get it. Vehim shilam barabim v'adama yechalek b'mechir. And they will make them master over many, meaning that these people who are going to be in charge, let's talk for a moment, the easiest to understand, the church, and think about, the early Middle Ages, mid-Middle Ages, they're going to have this extraordinary power. They're going to decide who are going to be the most honored, and they're going to decide not only who's going to be the most honored, they're going to own all the land. They're going to decide who has land rights or not. Okay. So you have all of these pieces coming together at this point that works really well when we're talking about the post-destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Holy Roman Empire. We're beginning to see how this could be. Dat Mikra still hangs on that this is still talking about Hasmonean, and this is not talking about Christianity, and it is still going all about Antiochus back and forth, and you'll see in a little bit why he takes that approach.
Was the land sold in the time of Antiochus?
Antiochus took over all the land,
Oh.
and he would give out who would have it. We see this all the time with the Greeks and the Romans. They would just rename cities. They would build cities and rename them. Uve 8 Kates. Now comes another break. We started before, when we first started, we started talking about primarily Rome. We then moved, according to the Barbanel, a quick jump over to Constantine. And now it's entirely possible, as Rashi says, that we're talking about, not from our perspective, not something that happened, but something that will happen. The ultimate Geula, the redemption, the end of the days. And so the 8 Kates, until now, they miscalculated when the end would come. Now let's talk about when the end itself comes. And what's going to happen is Nagach imo melech hanegev. The king of the south is going to fight, but Nagach is the terminology of to gore with a horn, which is why the Abarbanel says this all goes back to that prophecy of talking about the horns on the vision that Daniel had seen. I have to apologize. I'm just going to So where we had left off is with 8 Kates. So if you remember, this is the time of redemption. And we had talked about those prophecies of these animals with the multiple horns, and there was one horn that was going to be coming out. That one horn was the Roman Empire. And that one horn that was going to come out is going to gore the king of the south. Now, what's strange about this, and the Meforshim struggle with this, way back when, we had been talking about the wars of the king of the north and the king of the south. When we're talking about the Greeks, those terms make all the sense in the world, because the king of the north were the Seleucids, the king of the south were the Ptolemies, and it really works. But if I'm talking about a period of time late in the Roman Empire, already in the Roman Empire, where there are no Seleucids or Ptolemies anymore, what's going on here and how do you try to explain it? So one way of explaining it is that ultimately we're talking about two different empires. The north is the Roman Empire. The south, that's the Arab, the Muslim Empire. And the north and the south, if you think about it, they're in the Arabian Peninsula. So you're having...
There was no Romans Empire at the time that there were Muslims.
Well,
There
the
were
Holy,
Muslims till 700.
the Holy Roman Empire still exists.
But that's not the Roman Empire.
I know, it's not the Romans in the same way, but the successors of the Romans, okay, we talk about that. In other words, what we call Western culture, okay, what we call Western culture clashes
But
that
that's
culture.
not what we've been talking about the Roman Empire.
Right, so
It's very different than the. Holy
I
Roman
am
Empire.
not arguing with you, but once we hit over to Constantine, which we've been dealing with, then we are Holy Roman Empire, okay? Because we're already much later, we're the 6th century, okay? We're hitting into that period of time. And what, if I say, and again, if I say this is the 8 Kates, meaning the ultimate redemption, I have a problem of north and south. So I can say it's those two cultures. We don't have a Muslim empire anymore either, but there are the two cultures of Muslim versus Roman or Western versus the Middle Eastern cultures. Yeah, yeah.
Do not Chazal refer to current time as we're still in the time of Edom? I think that's Rashi's approach.
Right.
So we're still in the time of Edom, even though Edom goes all the way back to the Holy Roman Empire. The Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire just subsumed under one
Well, so,
name, Edom.
right, so when we talk about, and by the way, when we talk about the Pope and the papal, you see, Chazal are living in the times of the early church. Okay, not early, but Middle Ages. They're living later Mefarshim continue with those terminologies. And you're right, Barry is 100% right. We're not talking nowadays, it's not Rome, but we still talk about the Roman influence. And by the way, it's true if you think about it. Right now in the world, there are two major religions. We're a real minor one. You have Christianity, you have Islam. Okay, and those two major religions have major clashes that exist, and both of them are the continuation of those two empires and their influence in the world. The mere fact that the president of the United States visits the Pope, and it's not a personal visit as a Catholic, even though there were some issues apparently he dealt with, but it's a state visit. And we still give cover to this tiny little state, okay, Vatican City, which has an honor guard that's still dressed in medieval dress and couldn't do anything if they wanted to, okay? But we give them that level of cover, means that there's still something there in the world. Now, we're troubled by this. So the Mitzvot David says it's the king of the south versus Rome. The Reed says that it's clearly a battle of Christianity versus Islam. However, the Dat Mikra, who's been hanging in there all this time, saying this whole thing is Hasmonean, okay, it says that we've talked about the horns growing, and whether it's Greek or Roman, that last horn that's going to come out, that horn is the battle that the Hasmoneans are having. Whereas the Malbim says, no, we're talking about Armageddon. We're talking about the final battle. So there are 4 ways to understand what's going to happen. Rome, Greece, Christianity, Armageddon. All of these are possibilities within this phrase. The challenge we have is, what is the end? You know, the at over 8 Kates at the end. Now, are we talking about the end of the days? Are we talking about the end of this era? Are we talking about the end of the persecution? You know, nowadays we say the 8 Kates, we assume it's the end of days, but it could be something else. And that continues this ambiguity, which we have in this section, which makes it so hard to understand. But there is clearly what's happening here, some kind of shift. So as Yafet pointed out earlier, we started with military, we went over to theological, and now we're going back to clear military shifts. And at that 8 Kates, Yitnagach imo melech hanegev, v'yishta'er alav melech hatzafon berechev u'farashim u'va'oniyot rabot. And the northern king is going to attack him. Okay, yishta'er is kmo yista'er. Okay, it's like a ruach sa'ara, it's like a storm over him, with chariots and horsemen and ships. Uva ba'aratzot v'shataf va'avar. He's going to come into the lands, and he's just going to, wipe them away. Shataf again is like water. You know, he's just going to a torrent against them. Uva ba'eretz hatzvi, and this battle is going to come into Eretz Yisrael. V'rabot yikashelu, and many will fall. Ve'ela yimletu miyado, but these are going to escape. Edom, Moav, v'reshit bnei Ammon. These countries are going to still be around outside of Eretz Yisrael. Yeah.
There is no Moab, there is no Ammon.
Right.
How do you explain that?
I don't. Okay. Okay. I don't. But it says that these people are going to survive this battle. Now, again, if I say Ba Nebuchadnezzar v'bilbel ha'umot, that Nebuchadnezzar came at the time of the first destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and he practiced population exchange, and nations no longer have their identities, it could be as simple as just referring to a geographic distinction. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, okay, we know where they lived, and those areas will survive. V'yishlach yado ba'aratzot, but these areas are going to have the battles. Ve'eretz Mitzrayim lo tieh lifleitam, and there won't be escape to Egypt. Egypt being the south, there's no escaping it. So interestingly, and again, we had in Jewish history Jews who escaped persecution by going to Egypt. We had great centers of Jewish life in Egypt. That won't be a place of escape. Umashal b'michmanei hazahav ha'kesef. And the northern king is going to rule over Michmaneh, an unusual word, which is either the treasure houses, or the Medrash Daniel says it's the mines, the gold and silver mines, and over all of those things that are precious to the Egyptians. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians. The Mitzudat Zion says these are talking about pagan people. But all of them, these 2 nations, they are going to be at his heel. They're going to be trampled. Now, the Dat Mikra points out that according to Divrei Yamim Bet, Yud Bet Gimel and Tet Zayin Chet, these 2 nations, the Kushim and the Lubim, were mercenary soldiers. And so what it's saying is in the course of this battle, those great mercenary armies are going to be conquered. Ushmuot Yevahaluhu, but then they're going to hear something. There's going to be coming some kind of news, and it's going to frighten them, according to Sudot David. While this battle is taking place, Mimizrachu mitzafon, the news is going to be coming from the east and from the north. V'yatza b'chema gdola, he's going to run away very, very quickly. Lahashmid ulahachrim rabim, to try to destroy many others along the way. Now, we know with Antiochus, he did leave. This works still if I'm in the Hasmonean time. If I'm talking about Armageddon, the ultimate battle between Gog and Magog, it might happen. This is foretelling something that we haven't experienced. When I'm looking at what was, I can attach it to certain things that were. But if it's purely an end of days prophecy or an end of days vision, I don't know exactly what's happening here, but the battle seems to be intense. And then all of a sudden, they're going to leave. Vayita ohale apadno, and he's going to pitch the tent of his palace. Now, a tent of palace, the Medrash Daniel says that what this is referring to is they would actually build tents that were multi-room tents, that were palatial, even though they were tents. And this is what it's referring to versus saying he's building a real palace. And we can talk about an ohel being also referred to as a building. Ben Yamim lahar tzvi kodesh. And he's going to pitch his tent somewhere between Yerushalayim, that's Har Kodesh, Har Tzion, and Yam HaGadol, between the Mediterranean. Somewhere in the middle, there's going to be pitched a tent. Uva ad kitzo, ve'en ozer lo. And he's going to be there till his end. He's going to die there, says the Malbim. That's where Gog is going to fall, if I'm talking about Armageddon. But that's going to be his ultimate defeat. Or according to the Dat Mikra, it's talking about the Harei Yisrael, which we see the prophecy of Yechezkel as well. If I'm talking about the Hasmoneans, that's where ultimately that's going to be the end of the first round of battles will be there. And in that area around Yerushalayim, if you think about just for a moment, Modi'in, Hashmonaim, those cities are all called because that's where the Hasmonean headquarters were. The battles are going to be taking place and it will end there. Now, without feeling like we've accomplished anything right now, I just want to summarize with a few words and then let you know that the vision isn't over. The vision continues into the next chapter. But what we're talking about and where we started with on all of this is a vision of Jewish danger, salvations, further dangers, and ultimate salvation. The ultimate salvation in Daniel is what's so very, very powerful. It is entirely possible that it's talking all about things that for us occurred in history. The time of Daniel, it was still in the future. It's entirely possible that where it's partially talking about what was in history and will include pieces that are talking about the future. Many of the Meforshim take that approach, talking about that future. And by the way, the Christian church loves these two prakim as well, because they view this as the future piece as well. For them, are we talking about the church? Are we talking about the Hasmoneans? Are we talking just about the Romans? Are we talking about the Greeks? We don't know for sure. And it goes back to what I had mentioned 2 weeks ago. Our real problem in all of this is because the use of pronouns allows for the different interpretations. We don't give names. Now, again, because it's a vision, it makes sense. Because a vision isn't a prophecy. If it's a prophecy, it's going to say this person. It's a vision. It's a little bit more clouded. We don't know how to interpret it. Daniel doesn't know how to interpret it, but it is preserved, and it's typically, these prakim are viewed as talking about, this is some of the origin of some of the understanding of the end of days, literally that vision of what will come at the time of Mashiach. We'll continue next week. I know the Seamers will be in Israel at that time. Yeah.